The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
The government arrested Lundy on March 2, 1999, in Miami when he was returning from out of the country. A search warrant disclosed notes written by Lundy in which he described some of his concerns about his FBI questioning. The bank fraud trial did not touch on any of the facts surrounding Alydar's stall injury, but Tamala would attempt to enhance Lundy's sentence by proving he was involved in killing the horse. From Broken, The Suspicious Death of Alydar and the End of Horse Racing's Golden Age by Fred M. Cray. Well, welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is episode 94, Jurisprudent, Broken, The Suspicious Death of Alydar and the End of Horse Racing's Golden Age by Fred M. Cray, Part 3. First, thank you for your emails, comments, and support. I see you as you hear me. Keep the book and case suggestions coming, and we'll talk about it on Patreon. I can't wait. Now, while this book is one of my favorites, it is a complicated, involved story. So, as you hopefully have noticed, I am dropping episodes weekly. Yeah, this is a first for the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast, at least until we finish this story. So be sure to listen to the first two parts before jumping into part 3. Listen, the threads that are woven into this one cannot be skipped without huge holes, and we're delving into the oldest cold case mystery in horse racing history. Now, in part 2, Entanglements, we learned of the grand jury investigation into the death of Alydar, which was partially uncovered by the bank fraud, bribery, and wheeling and dealing that went on, J.T. Lundy in cahoots with First City Bank of Houston Vice President Frank Seahack, that ultimately brings Calumet to bankruptcy. Alton Stone, Calumet's watchman, is indicted for perjury, lying to this same grand jury. Now, the feds don't prosecute perjury often, and when they do, I believe there is a specific purpose behind it. In this case, pressuring Stone to give up their perceived bad guy, J.T. Lundy. Witnesses against Stone have made a number of important revelations. Cowboy Kip, the regular night watchman, was asked to take the night off by a man driving J.T. Lundy's sedan. With Alton Stone replacing Kip the very night Alydar was injured. J.T. Lundy's sister, Kathy Jones, is granted immunity for her testimony, and she explains that the insurance policies on Alydar were due to expire for non-payment, with Alydar dead right before their cancellation. In charge of perimeter security, Keed Hiley saw Stone leaving the stallion barn just 10 minutes before finding Alydar injured, with the lights in the Calumet office on. So, let the trial before Judge Hittner continue. U.S. Attorney Julia Tamala calls Dr. Linda Rhodes, now Stewart, to the stand. She was employed by Dr. William Baker's Woodford Veterinary Clinic, and she out and out rejects the idea that Alydar has been intentionally injured. It was simply unthinkable to her. Now, I view this as a liability. People do horrendous things to family, to loved ones, to children, the vulnerable. And Rhodes can't conceive of someone hurting an animal with $1 million attached to its death, trying to hold off insolvency. Well, sweet woman, dedicated woman, but a liability in determining the manner of death in this case. Cray asks, Was Dr. Rhodes Stewart aware that many horses had been killed for insurance? He refers to the 1993 article in the New York Times on Killing Horses for Money, A Craftsman's Dirty Secret by Don Terry. Terry documents multiple cases of horses being killed for insurance money. Our insurance adjuster, Terry McVeigh, is quoted in this article saying, quote, that as many as 5% of the claims he investigates, and those industry-wide, were questionable, end quote. A law review article by Leslie Hunter came out 2 years later, The Legal Prevention of Equine Insurance Fraud, How We Can Stop the Killing Game. Cray expounds, and a very solid foundation is laid that unquestionably presents how this was happening, and way too frequently. And again, I urge you to read the book and understand how all of this unfolds. Dr. Rhodes Stewart articulated the entanglement theory in her grand jury testimony, fully supporting that it was an accident, after never contemplating a murder for insurance theory. She also testified of her concern that Alydar was being overbred. She told Calumet management Alydar was sore, stiff in his hind end, and showed reluctance to breed on occasion. See, this tells me Lundy wasn't concerned about Alydar's welfare if he's breeding Alydar 100 times a year, far above the industry standard at the time. Lundy made a small fortune each time Alydar cooperated and mounted a mare. Had Lundy decreased Alydar's breeding on her advice? Dr. Rhodes Stewart did not know. Written 5 days after Alydar's injury, Dr. Rhodes Stewart's report and testimony told us that Alton Stone called her. Arriving at Alydar's stall between 10:10 and 10:15, Dr. Rhodes saw a dire emergency. Given the small amount of unclotted blood, plus the lack of swelling, and Alydar in the beginning stages of shock, Dr. Rhodes deduced the injury was at most 20 to 30 minutes old. Our timeline puts Alton Stone in Alydar's stall somewhere between 9:45 and 10:10 p.m. Rhodes' prognosis was grim. Later, when Alydar broke his femur, there was no other choice but to put the horse down. All Rhodes' documentation and x-rays of Alydar were kept in her filing cabinet, and she discovered them missing in the fall of 1991. Who would steal Alydar's medical records a year later, and why? Rhodes also said she, Dr. Baker, and Dr. Bramlage had put their heads together to figure out how the accident occurred, coming up with the entanglement theory. But oddly, in Carol Flake's 1991 article, Dr. Rhodes never mentions the entanglement theory. And in Auerbach's book, Rhodes repeatedly says, quote, she didn't know what happened that night, end quote. Goldsmith asked Rhodes whether she was suspicious about the injury. No, Alydar's fracture was not consistent with a baseball bat, even as she added that medical fracture classifications were not 100% accurate. The most common way for a horse to crack the cannon bone is to step in a hole or twisting a torquing type of action, which certainly could have happened if the horse got his leg stuck as theorized. Rhodes also disagreed with Kipp's description of the scuff marks on the stall door, as they looked like they were the result of rear hooves. None were fresh, however. She confirmed that Alydar was pampered and temperamental and would throw tantrums when not getting the attention he craved. Well, of course horses know that visits to the vet are not fun. I have to think about taking my own kids as toddlers to the pediatrician, and they howled every time. Broodmare manager Sandy Hatfield was a relative newcomer to Calumet, joining the farm in July 1990. Living on site, she was in bed the night of November 13th when Alton Stone called asking her to come to the stallion barn. 5 minutes later, she learned of Alydar's injury and that Stone was filling in for Cowboy. She noticed the broken bracket, adding that it had been repaired the next day. Sandy had told the grand jury that she believed the injury was accidental and repeated this now. While Alydar would run in his paddock, she had heard of him having tantrums, never seeing this for herself. Goldsmith asked if she examined Alydar's stall. Sandy replied she had been in that stall all night and she had seen kick marks on the stall door. Was Alydar kicking with his back legs? Sandy equivocated, replying that over the years, plenty of horses had kicked and marred the stall doors and walls. Now see, I would have asked, were any of these marks fresh? Because none appear fresh in the photographs. This is important. And by the way, all of this evidence, all of these photographs can be found on Fred M. Cray's evidence site, and the link is on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com. Now, Tamala dove into some contradictions. Had everyone accepted Dr. Bramlage's entanglement theory? Hatfield said no, that this hadn't been discussed that night, directly contradicting Dr. Rose Stewart's testimony. Hatfield admitted that she, quote, saw no blood or hair between the door and the wall that would be consistent with a horse struggling, end quote. Finally, Tom Dixon's turn came, speaking on his observations in the reports he'd filed to Lloyd's, stressing how important accuracy was given the millions of dollars involved. The difference between his first and second reports were highlighted, with Dixon triggered. Now recall, his first report said that JT had heard a loud noise in the stallion barn, but never said who heard what. And then the next day, Susan McGee reneged, denying anyone had heard anything, and the office area was vacant, which Dixon updates in his subsequent reports. Dixon said that Lundy told him Alton Stone found Alydar, while he personally hadn't spoken to Stone that night. Nor had Dixon investigated Calumet's finances, the status of insurance premium payments, and he had no idea the farm was $100 million in debt, or that the insurance policies on Alydar were being canceled in 2 weeks. Dixon agreed that these facts would have been important to know. The 6-day lapse in interviewing Stone was not explained either, and Dixon assumed that Stone, Lundy, and McGee all told the truth. He admitted that the demeanor of those there that night was such that he didn't believe it to be fraudulent. Authenticated by Dixon, his belated interview with Stone was played for the jury. Did Dixon know that Kip, the usual watchman, was asked to take time off by a man in a Crown Victoria? Dixon said he did not. If he had, he would have interviewed these people and faxed Lloyd's to say they needed a lawyer who could take statements under oath. All right, this line of questioning simply shredded Dixon's credibility. The actual evidence that Alydar kicked the door was scant. The evidence that Alydar's leg was entangled was even less evident. That the stall door was rapidly repaired went unquestioned. Goldsmith asked Dixon about the surgery. If there was a conspiracy to kill the horse, why attempt heroic surgery to save the horse? Dixon's answer was stunning. Quote, the surgery would have been attempted no matter what, end quote. So this surgery was not a heartfelt, heroic effort to save a beloved horse. It was procedural. Now, this totally undercuts the argument that Lundy couldn't have killed his beloved Alydar because he begged Bramblage for the last-ditch surgery. This is entirely false. Next to the stand was Marcia Matthews, the former wife of Calumet CFO and attorney Gary Matthews, who had wined and dined Lundy at their home on occasion. She knew that Calumet was on the verge of bankruptcy and that Alydar was insured for a ton of money. Weeks prior to Alydar's death, Lundy and Gary were discussing Calumet's need for money, and Marcia testified that Lundy said, "Objection! Hearsay, Your Honor," said Goldsmith, and the judge ruled that this was out. What Marcia was going to say was reported in the newspaper. Lundy told Matthews, quote, "There are ways to get rid of that horse," end quote. But hearsay is hearsay, and prosecutor Tamala lost the single piece of evidence she had to tie Lundy to the murder of Alydar. Goldsmith then asked for a mistrial, with the judge denying the motion. Alton Stone's grand jury testimony was read to this jury, though it was not entered into the record. Grand jury testimony is secret, with Stone admitting doubts about Alydar injuring himself by kicking the stall, which was covered over with rubber mats, the floor made of rubbered material. He also denied seeing kick marks on the heavy oak door. FBI agent Robert Foster testified that he asked Alton Stone if the door opened awkwardly. No, he hadn't noticed that, but Stone did recall unlatching it. That is important. Remember that. Stone only heard about the broken bracket the following day, but Foster said that Stone told Dixon the exact opposite, that he had noticed the displaced bracket. After Stone's arrest, Foster interviewed him again, with Alton claiming his initial story was how he recalled it, but also answered with a lot of, "I don't know, I can't remember," all vague replies. He was adjusting his response to fit the facts that Foster shared with him. In a third interview, this time with Goldsmith present, it went no better. Tamala made mincemeat of all of the conflicting statements that Stone had given. Author Carol Flake was called to speak on her interviews with Alton Stone in her article. Her takeaways was that Stone was still emotional about it, more so than most, and Alydar was worth more dead than alive. Stone had told her, quote, "If Alydar had lived, the farm would have been in worse shape. J.T. Lundy saw Alydar as a dollar sign," end quote. Tamala now asked the singular most important question, probably of the entire trial. Quote, "Did Mr. Stone make any comments to you relating to whether or not Mr. Lundy knew that the injury to Alydar was going to happen?" Flake's answer? He knew JT said something was going to happen to the horse, and that was why he was pulled off security, end quote. Goldsmith asked no questions. The defense's first witness was Calumet's maintenance supervisor, Stanley Broughton. Around midnight, he first heard of Alydar's injury. 7 a.m. the next morning, he arrived at work with Susan McGee showing Broughton the stall door where the injury had occurred and asking him to repair the bracket. Doing so, he found that rust had, quote, "eaten away the bolt and worn it down pretty bad. There was not much left of the bolt that anchored the roller to the floor," end quote. To reinstall it, he had to drill new holes, setting a new anchor in concrete. Quote, "It wouldn't have taken much of a blow to break the bracket off or knock it loose," end quote. The door would have opened correctly unless you pulled the door outward. The latch wasn't damaged, with door stops helping to hold the door in place. So the broken bracket was not evidence of a massive kick by Alydar at all. Cray writes, quote, "Broughton's testimony completely changed the physics of Alydar's injury. With the bolts corroded, a slight kick would have been enough to entangle Alydar's hoof," end quote. So, wait a second. This is 8 years later, and we have heard from equine experts, and all we've heard from the experts is that Alydar had a temper, threw tantrums powerful enough to shear off the brackets and injure himself, while none of them, not Dixon, Dr. Bramblage, Brian Chambers, John Ward, had ever actually seen or heard another horse doing this. See, this is why the accident theory was so far-fetched to begin with. And all of this with no one knowing the bolts were corroded. Well, Broughton had thrown this critical evidence away after he fixed it. On cross, Julia Tamala got Stanley Broughton to confirm that someone could have broken the bolt off with a hammer, and McGee instructed him to fix the bolt immediately and had not told him to wait until after the insurance investigation. Michael Coulter, the stallion foreman and Alydar's groom, who understood Alydar's day-to-day behavior the best, testified next. He ensured that the stallions were physically well-kept, fed, watered, cleaned, and settled in at night. Coulter knew Alydar. Most days he was fine, but when he wanted attention, he'd jump around, pawing at the door. The day after Alydar's injury, Coulter was at work, noticing the missing roller bracket. But fixing it quickly wasn't anything unusual. The stallion barn was always a top priority at Calumet. Assistant U.S. Attorney John Braddock crossed Coulter, who admitted that Alydar was his favorite stallion, nice to work with, while Capote would, quote, try to kill you when you went in. With Alydar, you could walk into the stall and you could put your hands on him and do anything you wanted to, end quote. His need for attention was not unusual either. He had been babied since he was a foal. He saw nothing to indicate Alydar was upset or bothered when he left work at 5 p.m. On learning Alydar had kicked hard enough to break his leg, Coulter was shocked. On redirect, Coulter agreed that with the corroded bolts, Alydar didn't have to kick as hard, and he could have had a tantrum after 5 p.m. Dr. William Baker had been a veterinarian for 30 years, dealing primarily with thoroughbreds at his Woodford Veterinary Clinic. On that night, he went directly to Alydar's stall between 9:30 and 10 p.m. With the fracture now compound, it was 99% fatal, and he told Lundy there wasn't much to be done. Larry Bramblage was called in to give a second opinion. On his arrival, Alydar was sedated and the wound splinted. The next day was surgery, repairing the leg, which was put in a cast. Based on years of treating Alydar and knowing his temperament, he said the horse was difficult to treat, not uncontrollable, but hard to give a shot, and he had a mean streak in him. Goldsmith asked how Alydar would respond to a stranger carrying an object he was unaccustomed to seeing. Quote, he would go berserk. This horse is just a very apprehensive horse, very suspicious and protective of his ground. Was Alydar known to be a horse that would kick? Dr. Baker said, oh yes, strike and bite. Dr. Baker believed the injury was caused by a self-induced stress injury in which the horse broke it when he kicked the stall, end quote. He put the time of injury at 8:30 to 9 p.m. But wait, Alton Stone said he checked Alydar at 9:25 p.m. and Alydar was fine. Well, not feeling too comfortable with this doctor's testimony, and frankly, my cats react unhappily when we go to the vet, who is a lovely, caring woman, but they're fearful of shots. They don't want to be handled by strangers. This is not their normal behavior. Tamala began by attacking Dr. Baker's neutrality as a witness. Oh, yeah, my opinion? Oh, yeah, he's in JT's pocket. Had he been friends with JT Lundy since the 1970s, working on his farm at Midway? Yes. Was Calumet his biggest client? Yes. Were he and Lundy still in contact? Yes. But Baker insisted that Alydar's injury was self-induced. Hadn't Dr. Baker told the grand jury that this type of fracture could be caused by a racing injury, stepping in a hole, or being kicked by another horse? Well, yes, he had. So he had not told the grand jury about the entanglement theory. Well, Baker was now flustered as Tamala pressed on. Quote, was it possible Alydar's injury could have been caused by a high-speed impact, such as a kick by another horse? End quote. Baker grudgingly agreed. Was the entanglement theory correct? Dr. Baker said it was, although he had not discussed it with Bramblage or Rhodes. And then Dr. Baker admitted he hadn't seen the x-rays. Well, shut the front door. This veterinarian is making serious diagnoses with millions of dollars resting on it and never looked at the x-rays? I'm confused. Are you confused? But yet, Tamala had scored a huge prosecution victory, getting Dr. Baker to admit never telling the grand jury about the entanglement theory. Now the defense called in the big gun, Dr. Larry Bramblage, the premier orthopedic equine surgeon in the United States, their star witness. Many times, he had stressed to the press that Alydar's injury was an accident, ridiculing any suggestion that the horse had been intentionally injured. Paraphrasing now, Bramblage identified the injury as a spiral oblique fracture with torquing that resulted from a twisting of the bone, different from an injury caused by being struck by an object. During surgery, he confirmed this, seeing the bone itself. After surgery, he gave Alydar a 50-50 chance. When he began resisting the sling, they could have left him in, risking fatal colic, or they could take him out. Taken out, Alydar walked over and began eating hay, with everyone cheering. Bramblage left, only being called back minutes later. Alydar had fallen, breaking the femur, and was euthanized. How had Dr. Bramblage decided the cause of the injury? Well, and the x-rays, said the preeminent orthopedic veterinarian. Tamala asked if the broken roller had factored into this assessment. Why, yes, it had, as he was looking for a reason and nothing else was amiss. Was Dr. Bramblage looking for an accidental reason for the injury? Grudgingly, Bramblage conceded he was. Sure sounds like confirmation bias to me. This is a definition from Simply Psychology. The tendency to look for information that supports rather than rejects one's preconceptions, typically by interpreting evidence to confirm existing beliefs while rejecting or ignoring any conflicting data. I think that's what's going on here. The preconceived notion held by all three vets was that Alydar's injury was an accident, as J.T. Lundy had told them immediately. They had never really considered anything else. And then Alton Stone exercised his right not to testify as the defense rested. Judge Hittner read the jury instructions. This was about Stone making false statements material to the grand jury inquiry. In her closing argument, Tamala emphasized that Stone was deeply involved in a cover-up from the beginning. His statement to Tom Dixon was manufactured, making it appear Alydar was alone when Stone was clearly there. Keed Hiley had found the horse injured, with Stone lurking nearby. He also knew about Calumet's shaky finances, telling Carol Flake that Lundy knew something was going to happen to Alydar. He repeatedly lied to the grand jury. He wasn't with Hiley at the canteen, so where was he? Under oath, Stone gave multiple inconsistent stories about what went on that night, the very definition of perjury. Now, Goldsmith would speak last. The prosecution was focused on conspiracy theories. Calumet had killed Alydar, using the money to push off bankruptcy, which happened anyway. Sadly, the reality was that Alydar did this to himself. Spoiled, temperamental, he got frisky wanting attention. The roller bracket came off due to erosion, not other nefarious reasons. And Stone didn't lie about Kip and substituting for him. He was just mixing up Kip's earlier vacation with this night, him being off. Stone gained nothing from the horse's death, and his memory was poor of that night because he was emotional himself. Deliberations began on June 30th, 1998, with the jury reaching a verdict 3 days later. Alton Stone was guilty on both counts, with Stone tearing up. Jury forewoman Sheila Donnelly told the LA Times that, quote, "There was so much sympathy for Alton Stone. They really felt strongly that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but it doesn't matter. He willingly told a lie," end quote. Juror Jamie Wissonet commented, quote, "I do not think he was guilty of hurting that horse. I think they probably knew he wasn't very attentive, and that's why they asked him to work," end quote. Some jurors believe that there was some conspiracy and would have liked to have heard from J.T. Lundy himself. Letters poured into Judge Hittner's office asking for leniency, including those from Alton's wife, Sheila. Making no statement, the judge sentenced Alton Stone to 5 months, being served consecutively, less time than the defense had requested, with Stone relieved. And the next trials. December 11th, 1989, J.T. Lundy and Gary Matthews were indicted for conspiracy, bank fraud, and bribery, and making false statements to bank officials to obtain loans. Lundy was arrested on March 2, 1999. Mid-January 2000 in Houston, his trial began before Judge Sim Lake. Julia Tamala was back, with U.S. Attorney Jim Powers prosecuting. David McGee, a veteran trial lawyer, was Lundy's defense attorney. Dan Gogdell was representing Gary Matthews, another experienced attorney. Prosecuting J.T. Lundy and Gary Matthews was going to be a daunting task. They'd have to focus on a few of the instances when now twice convicted former Citibank of Houston VP Frank Sehack had been bribed and/or Lundy and Matthews clearly misrepresented their financial situation. Gary Matthews became Calumet's CFO in 1982. By 1985, Calumet had taken out loans with Citizens Fidelity of Lexington, which now topped $25 million. 1987, Calumet couldn't make its payments, with Citizen Fidelity applying pressure. Calumet needed another loan. Quietly going to First City National of Houston, Lundy and Matthews slid down the slippery slope of fiscal malfeasance. SEAC, second in charge of the billion-dollar bank, ordered his auditors to approve Calumet loans without vetting. Lundy and Matthews then acquired inflated appraisals, which allowed them to grotesquely misrepresent the financial condition of Calumet. Expecting a grim meeting about defaulting, Citizens Fidelity was delighted when told that First City was going to pay them off, with First City taking over Calumet's account. What did Sehack get? Well, among the things, a $1,300,000 business deduction based on a fake loan as part of an investment in Alydar and other stallions, plus a number of other ill-conceived bribery schemes. Hiding Calumet's involvement, they created an entity called Equine Capital Corporation, ECC. Calumet now is loaning money to the ECC, who loaned money to SEAC. In reality, this was a, quote, check-kitching scheme, which allowed money to appear to be lent, but actually funded itself on artificially inflated bank account balances supported by worthless checks, end quote. But an auditor discovered Calumet's loan to ECC for $460,000, something expressly prohibited in Calumet's deal with First City, who had questions. Paraphrasing now, Matthews couldn't say this is about paying off SEAC, so he got creative, saying it was a tax financing transaction to enable an individual to lease a mare at the end of 1998. Calumet hadn't actually lended the money to ECC, which was only a vehicle to add substance to the transaction, a blatant fraud. And oh boy, in early 1989, Calumet also gave Sehack a breeding season with Secreto for $1, which was worth approximately $125,000. There are many more financial shenanigans, which are truly mind-blowing. And again, you need to read the book for all of this. It is just insane. September 20th, 1989, Gary Matthews penned an extremely pessimistic memo about Calumet's debts and inability to pay their loans. There was a faint glimmer of hope that some Japanese investors might come to the rescue. Prosecutors appreciated Matthews' clearly spelled out memo, highlighting SEAC's role, especially in deferring debt payments and forgiving SEAC's own loans from Calumet, evidence of bribery. Lundy's defense. They claimed that JT was uneducated and thus totally unable to manipulate a huge financial institution. He had set out to restore Calumet for the right family, talk about the fail of the century, and he spent money to that end. Loans were approved by Calumet's executive committee, including attorney Lyle Roby and the Right Trust Fund lawyers. Gary Matthews' defense emphasized that he'd made nothing on these loans himself, and these deals were legal and made in good faith. CHAC was to blame because he had approved the bad loans. Gary Matthews had also fully cooperated with the FBI to get CHAC convicted, so it was pure hypocrisy to punish him now. The case went to deliberations on February 7th, 2000, and 90 minutes later, they came to a verdict. Both Lundy and Matthews were found guilty on all counts. There was just too much evidence that they had both misrepresented Calumet's financial situation. Matthews was sentenced to 21 months in prison, a very light sentence. Restitution was set at $20,473,783. Now, during the 3-week trial, Lundy was completely delusional, telling Blood Horse magazine writer Eric Mitchell that he was going to be fine because he hadn't done anything wrong. How the mighty fall. Lundy's sentencing hearing came next, and the prosecution argued for the maximum sentence because they would demonstrate that Lundy had a hand in Alydar's death. Judge Lake was not enthusiastic. Quote, "Why are you seeking, through sort of the back door, to hold Mr. Lundy criminally culpable for something that was not an issue in the trial of this case? It seems to the court that this should have been a basis of a separate indictment if the government thought Lundy was criminally responsible." End quote. Prosecutor Tamala argued that the death of Alydar was fundamental to conducting the bank fraud. $20 million of Alydar's insurance payout went to First City, plus they had witnesses. While they had not chosen to indict Lundy directly for the death of Alydar, the FBI was still gathering additional evidence. Now, the defense argued against including Alydar's death in all of this, as you might expect. It was an accident. Well, Judge Lake agreed to listen to see if he was persuaded, and much of what occurred next rehashed Stone's trial. FBI agent Rob Foster explained Marcia Matthews' testimony about Lundy saying, "There are ways of killing a horse." Now, Judge Lake asked if Alton Stone had been offered immunity, and Foster confirmed he had, with Stone not implicating anyone or was unwilling to do so. Further, it came out that the prosecution was never able to determine who had called Lundy, if anyone had, to alert him about Alydar's injury that night. Well, if no one had called him, he must have known, because how and why did he show up at the scene? Well, in spite of the deficiencies, Foster held his own on the stand against defense attorney McGee. Foster also explained on how the morning of Alydar's injury, Stanley Broughton had fixed the roller bracket, removing and disposing of the old corroded bolts. But he had not touched the remaining old intact bolts. Dixon's photo of the brackets with the bolts coming out of the bottom was introduced as evidence. Back in 1998, the FBI had removed the cement core where Broughton's new roller bracket was installed, sending this to the FBI crime lab with no definitive conclusions. The question was, did the remaining original bolts match the original disturbed bolts that were in Dixon's photo from the night of Alydar's injury? Dr. George Pratt of MIT, a physicist who is involved in horse research, was called in to examine this evidence. First, he went to Calumet, examining the stallion barn, the stall, and the door specifically. He testified to his conclusions. 1. The level of bolt corrosion in the photos does not match that of the undisturbed bolts in the cement core. They should match, but did not. And 2, the force that broke the bolts did not come from inside the stall, meaning Alydar, but came from outside. The judge asked Pratt to explain this. Doing so, Pratt told the court, quote, "If you look at the metal lip of the bolts, you can see in which direction they were cut off, likely by a cold chisel, not a hoof. If the stall door was pushed out and violently sheared off, it would have left a lip of metal on the outside." End quote. This is not what happened. Whatever sheared off those bolts, it was not a force that originated inside that stall.
Whoa.
Well, holy shit, how do you get past that? Now, Judge Lake interjected again, asking Dr. Pratt how much force a large stallion can exert, kicking with a or both rear legs. Pratt replied, over 1,000 pounds of pressure, perhaps 2,000. Well, how much force was required to shear off the bolts from within the stall? Quote, I think it was 6,600 pounds required to shear those bolts off. In order to generate that kind of force at the site of the bracket, he would have had to kick about 3 feet off the ground. He'd have to kick at a force of about 12,000 pounds, and that's much more than any stallion or horse could generate. End quote. Well, corroded bolts would lessen the amount of force. Pratt continued, quote, well, yes, that's true. The original roller bracket bolts, with their stubs sticking out of the cement, were in pretty good shape, not heavily corroded. Also, using a magnet, he detected metal shavings that looked like fragments a chisel would make. Whatever happened to the bolts, it was an intentional act. End quote. Holy shit again. On cross, Pratt admitted that he assumed the bolts were soft steel, because if they were not, the force required would be a lot higher than he had calculated, way beyond what a thoroughbred could kick. Now, in 2002, Dr. George Pratt would tell Dominic Dunn in his documentary, Unbridled Greed, quote, that the bracket in the aisle was a plant. If Alydar kicked the inside of the stall, the lip of the metal would have faced outward. In reality, the lip was pointing more or less into the stall, end quote. 4 years later, Dr. Pratt was adamant that kicking was not the cause of Alydar's injury. The physics does not work. I have a link on my blog to the documentary Unbridled Greed. It is absolutely worth watching. And Tom Dixon was back again, now testifying for the defense. He said that J.T. Lundy was emotional on the night of Alydar's injury. Quote, if he was faking it, he ought to get an Oscar and an Emmy all in one night, end quote. He also said that Alydar's injury occurred when his leg got stuck in the door, twisting it, causing the bone to snap. So Dixon has now adopted the entanglement theory. On cross, U.S. Attorney Jim Powers pressed Dixon on his original report, saying it was caused by Alydar kicking the door. But also, it was getting late in the day, and the prosecution was under pressure to wrap it up, and they didn't get further into this. They ended it. And Judge Lake made his ruling. Paraphrasing now, while the judge believed that there was ample motive for J.T. Lundy to kill Alydar to collect insurance proceeds to delay foreclosure, and he had the opportunity being there the night of the injury, and some physical evidence does exist, he was, quote, unable to conclude by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Lundy is responsible for the death of Alydar. There is strong suspicion, counterbalanced by the testimony of 2 eminent treating veterinarians. I am not persuaded that the government has sustained its burden, end quote. Tamala now argued for 63 months at the top of the sentencing guide. Lundy had shown no remorse, had committed crimes. All he cared about was himself. And Judge Lake sentenced the shocked Lundy to 54 months. Lundy's restitution was set at $20,473,783 to be paid in installments of $200 a month. Defense attorney McGee requested that Lundy be released on bond to appeal, which was denied by Judge Lake, who saw no legal reason that an appeal would result in reversal. And the judge was correct. McGee's writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court was denied October 21, 2002. And that will wrap up episode 94, Jurisprudence, Unbroken, The Suspicious Death of Alydar and the End of Horse Racing's Golden Age by Fred M. Cray. The trials might be over, but the investigation is just kicking in as Fred Cray endeavors to heat up this cold case. Episode 96, Legacy, will drop in 2 weeks. Do not miss this conclusion or my follow-up interview with Fred Cray, episode 97, Theriacide, where Fred shares what he didn't include in the book. And I love it when the authors let us peek behind the curtain. Now, our next book comes from CrimeCon 2024, where I met Lindsay Wade, and my respect and my admiration for her knows no bounds. In My DNA was published in 2022. It's based on Lindsay's 21-year law enforcement career in the Tacoma region of Washington state. Now, her book isn't about a single case. She delves into the shocking sex crimes and homicides that are taking place. And we gain her unique perspective as a biracial female detective in a male-dominated profession. Thank you for listening, Murder Bookies. I am making a few changes to the podcast in the upcoming weeks, so please let me know if you've noticed. And please take a few minutes to leave an awesome review that'll help us make new Murder Bookies. Tell a friend about the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. Share your thoughts with me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com, on X, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or join Patreon for $4 a month. I see you as you hear me. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.